Hello, 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 hello. Welcome once again to Not a Prog Reborn, but again, my travels, what's kind of become the main content for this channel. I wouldn't really go that far. I kind of just do this out of my enjoyment for the game. It's not really a content thing that much, though. If it gets me access to streamer events, then I would certainly not turn that down. But we're reviewing another set of Magic the Gathering cards. We had a fairly quick spoiler season, so unlike previous times, we're going to try and go through all of them today. There are 193 cards to go through. Again, a lot of them are just draft chaff, so not going to have too much to talk about with them. But we have a new Universes Beyond set, this time specifically Marvel Spider-Man. Not a full-on Marvel collab, but just for the Spider-Man IP in Marvel. My understanding is that they are doing more than just Spider-Man as part of a collab with Marvel. My also understanding was this was originally not supposed to be a standard legal set. It was originally supposed to be something akin to the Assassin's Creed set that they did last summer, 2024, I think. And then my understanding was the Assassin's Creed set did not sell particularly well, nor did people enjoy the reduced pack count in things like the Assassin's Creed set and the Aftermath, March of the Machines Aftermath set. So they quickly scrapped together some additional cards into this Spider-Man release, and from there we have a closer to what we used to see in sort of like three set block sets, where we have a small set. It's not like we're returning to three set blocks, but we have a relatively small set of cards being added in. So there's going to be, some shakeup in the meta, but I wouldn't expect there to be a ton of shakeup in the meta, just because there's not a ton of cards coming in with this set. My understanding as well is for the drafting of this set, that's why they introduced this whole pick 2 draft, because if they did the original pick 1 style draft with this set, everyone's decks would kind of be either homogenous or very low powered. My understanding is it's also supposed to be only 5 draft archetypes. You can really tell that they kind of scrambled on this set. As far as standard goes, though, I'm mostly considering it very similar to what you would get in a small set from the old block structure. Didn't really introduce too much about me, why you should listen to me on any of these. Longtime Magic player, been playing since Onslaught block. Have had multiple extended periods off of Magic while we were while I was going through school or going through college or for various reasons. But I've been back in the game since sort of mid Bloomborough, and I've been enjoying my time back. I am primarily a Magic the Gathering Arena standard player, primarily best of 1, but it's not that different than best of 3. Though I think the current meta is fairly different between the two. And as far as paper goes, back in the day I used to be a limited player for paper Magic. I would go to FNMs and do fairly well in limited. These days when I do paper events, it is mostly Commander. As far as what you're going to get out of this stream, I'm going to speak on the cards almost exclusively from a standard perspective. If the card is really only limited draft chaff, I might just say something like that, but I'm not really going to delve too deeply into limited. I haven't really played. I don't really enjoy the limited format on Arena. I enjoy the whole pod format and then having to play your pod, whereas instead of the league format of Arena or even Magic the Gathering Online. So I'm going to primarily be speaking from standard perspective. I'll be talking about cards that I think fit into existing archetypes or existing decks, cards that I think might spawn new archetypes, cards that I think that are just powerful, and maybe some cards that I think are overhyped or maybe even undervalued by folks. Haven't done a ton of viewing on these cards, so some of them I'll be seeing either the first or second time, so it will be a lot more spur of the moment thinking on some of these cards. So if there's some sort of obvious interaction that maybe I'm missing, apologize. But that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Right off the bat with a mythic Anti-Venom Horrifying Healer for white. So 5 total white pips of mana. We have legendary creature Symbiote Hero at mythic. It is a 5/5 that says when it enters, if he was cast, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and if damage would be dealt to Anti-Venom, prevent that damage and put that many +1/+1 counters on him. An interesting card. 5 mana for 5/5. That's not that great, right? But 5 mana for 5/5 that zombifies, that reanimates. That's okay. You have to be in all white, but you could have a Baelmerc, not a Baelmerc, a Mistmoors in your graveyard. You could have a Sire of Seven Deaths in your graveyard if you're trying to do some sort of like Uginish strategy. Though I think doing 5 white, you're probably not doing an Uginish strategy. But still, 5 mana for a 5/5 plus something else from your graveyard. That's decent. There was a Phyrexian from the, I think, Brothers War, or maybe All Will Be One, that had something had some line of text very similar to this. Phyrexian Vindicator, I think it might have been. That saw a little bit of play. Didn't see a ton of play, because ultimately this is just a big beater. It blocks forever, but if you're playing against somebody who has actual removal, it's 5 mana for a 5/5. It also has the clause of if he was cast, so there are no blink shenanigans. This isn't like the Return of Karmic Guide or anything like that. So I think it can be a powerful card if we ever go back to Theros and get another, a reprint of Nykthos. This is some great mana pips for mono white devotion, but I think if you're really the only deck that could play this is sort of like a mono white tokens list, and your Elspeth is just better than what you're doing here. So powerful set of effects, but ultimately just a big idiot. Next up, we have Arachne, Psionic Weaver. For 2 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Spider Human Hero. At rare, it is a 3/3 with web slinging for a single white. And this is the first time we're seeing web slinging, so let's go ahead and talk about it. You may cast this spell for its web slinging cost, in this case, a single white, if you also return a tapped creature you control to its owner's hand. So similar-ish to Ninjutsu. However, this is not a... Ninjutsu has a specific window in which you can activate it. And Ninjutsu doesn't cast the creature. It puts the Ninjutsu ability onto the stack. So with web slinging, you could counter, in this case, Arachne, and get rid of the creature, whereas with Ninjutsu, the only way to prevent whatever you're ninjutsuing in from coming into play would be to stifle the trigger, but then you wouldn't actually counter the card. The card would stay in your opponent's hand, whereas if you counter a web sling, that's just an alternate casting cost, and so the card would go into the graveyard. However, Ninjutsu requires you to move into combat, you to attack with a creature, and for that creature to be unblocked. So if you are facing a... if you've ever played the Dimir mid-range deck in Standard, a lot of their play is about using either removal or just using things like Floodpits Drowner in order to allow some cheap creature or some flyer to attack so that you can ninjutsu in Kaido and get through. And they have to jump through these hoops. It's not that many hoops, but they do have to jump through some hoops to get Kaido down. And if your opponent is able to, maintain blockers or remove your attackers, you can't really... You're going to have to pay full price for Kaido, and paying full price for Kaido, it's still a great card, but it's not as powerful as if you were able to get him a turn earlier or ninjutsu him in and bring something back. Whereas here, if I for web slinging, the big I think the obvious one that most people see is things like Mana Dorks. You tap your Mana Dork for to float some mana, and then either use that to web sling, use that for the web slinging cost, or use it for something else, and then web sling off of your Mana Dork. Or if you have any other activated ability that you have with a creature that requires tapping it. You've got, in Standard right now, we've got all these station lands. You've got all sorts of things that allow you to tap a creature without putting them into combat, and web slinging then makes it so that you're reducing the cost of, most of the time, reducing the cost. There's no guarantee that the web slinging cost is cheaper than the the cost of the creature. Typically it is, but sometimes you'll see where web slinging costs more, but that's because there's some additional ability for casting it via web sling. You do have to follow normal timing rules because you are casting the spell. It's just an alternative cost, and if your opponent counters the spell, you did already have to, as part of the cost of the spell, you had to return that creature, so it's not like your creature stays on the creature that you returned as part of the web sling doesn't like return to the battlefield or stay on the battlefield until the actual spell resolves or anything like that. So there's some positives and negatives to web slinging. So hopefully that gets everything on web slinging. If I think of anything else as we should talk about other cards with web slinging, I'll try and bring it up. So what else does Arachne do? As Arachne enters, look at an opponent's hand, then choose a card type other than creature. So this is an as enters ability. So if the spell resolves, Arachne is, as it is entering, you immediately get to see your opponent's hand. It's not a trigger that enters the stack that you could stifle or interact with or anything like that. So if your opponent, which is important here because what it says is, as it enters, look at opponent's hand, then choose a card type other than creature. Spells of the chosen type cost 1 generic more to cast. So if you bring Arachne in, either web sling or not, and you are trying to hold up removal because you want to kill Arachne, but Arachne comes in, looks at your hand, you don't have any opportunity, you being the opponent of the person who's playing Arachne, doesn't have any opportunity to cast that removal spell before the person who played Arachne had the opportunity to make that removal spell cost 1 more. So if you have a removal spell and you're wanting to use it on something else other than Arachne, you're going to need to use it while Arachne's on the stack. Or cross your fingers that they don't name instant or enchantment, or if you're playing like a Nowhere to Run or something like that. As far as playability, I think this is a pretty playable card, especially if you can web sling it. You can go, it doesn't particularly work well with, I think the card's called Lightstall Inquisitor, the 1-drop from Edge of Eternity, that also looks at your opponent's hand because that creature has vigilance. But if you say have station lands in order to tap it, or you play any other kind of 1-drop, you can just go 1-drop, turn 2, attack with that 1-drop, second main, web sling that 1-drop back to your hand to bring Arachne into play, and then replay the 1-drop. And then you have a 1-mana 3/3 that probably disrupted your opponent's game plan. Being white, I'm trying to think, like, is this good enough in some sort of Boros aggressive deck like I've been playing recently, playing Boros Burn in Best of 1? Probably not, but I could see this card in some kind of white weenie strategy with Lumen class Frigate, because you can play that Lumen class Frigate, station it up, use the station on it in order to tap your things down, and then Arachne out, and then you're disrupting your opponent's game plan just long enough so that you can get in your 20 damage or however much you needed to. And then when it's on the battlefield, it is a 3-cost creature, so It's not going to get swept up by something like a Pinnacle Star Cage, whereas a lot of your other stuff in your White Weenie deck would be. So, I think this is a pretty good card. Even in Standard, I think this is a pretty darn good card. Next is Aunt May. For a single white, we have a legendary creature, Human Citizen, at uncommon. She is an 0/2 with whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life. If it's a spider, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So Arachne is a spider. So if you're web slinging with Arachne, then sure. You couldn't web sling Aunt May in order to get the +1/+1 counter because Aunt May is already off the battlefield. Ultimately, this is just another Soul Sister. It's another Soul Warden effect. We already have Hinterland Sanctifier and Case of the Uneaten Feast in Standard. And the fact that Aunt May is legendary is the biggest downside to her. Let both her being legendary and not having any attack are two pretty big downsides, because compared to Hinterland Sanctifier and Case of the Uneaten Feast. So maybe if you want like a 9th copy of a 1 mana Soul Warden effect. I know some decks have been playing Life Creed Duo, I think is what it's called. The 2 mana flying Soul Sister. The 2 mana flying Soul Warden effect. Maybe in that type of deck you want to swap it out. Especially if you have some number of spiders, then maybe you can think about it. Because of the +1/+1 effect, but I think if you're just like, hey, I want to put this in my mono white life gain deck or my Orzhov life gain deck, you've probably got better options. City Pigeon. For a single white, we have a creature Bird at common. It is a 1/1 flyer with when this creature leaves the battlefield, create a food token. Interestingly, it is a leaves trigger, not a dies trigger. So if this gets swept up by a Pinnacle Star Cage, or if you yourself return it via web slinging or Pixie, Nurturing Pixie, or something, Sun Pearl Kirin, something like that, then you're going to get the food token regardless. I think a surprisingly good card. There still is Bird synergy from the Final Fantasy set. Kind of, additional copies of Healer's Hawk. If you're trying to make like a Selesnya Birds or a Bant Birds type deck. For a relatively innocuous card, I think this is okay. Next up is Costume Closet. For 1 and a white, we have an artifact at uncommon. This artifact enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. It's an artifact, so it's not like it's going to that provides anything for it. But if you do, there are a number of ways to turn non-creature artifacts into creatures. So at a glyph, I forget the name of the station card from Edge of Eternities, but that's a way to turn something temporarily into an artifact creature. There's Tezzeret, there's Tough Cookie, stuff like that. And in those cases, the +1/+1 counters would, if you turned it into a creature, then they would affect it. But anyways, it has an activated ability of tap to move a +1/+1 counter from this artifact onto target creature you control, but you can only do it at sorcery speed. And then whenever a modified creature you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on this artifact. And so First time we're seeing modified. It's a returning mechanic. It's not new to the set, but modified just means if a creature has an equipment attached to it, has any auras attached to it, or it has any number of counters, whether they're +1/+1 or lifelink counters, any type of counters, then they are modified. Then they become quote unquote modified creatures. An interesting card. It's kind of 2 mana do nothing, semi do nothing. You can, well, I say do nothing. It's 2 mana because it's not a creature. You can immediately tap it. So if you go 1 drop into this, you can immediately put a +1/+1 counter on your 1 drop. Again, it's only sorcery speed, so you can't do any sort of shenanigans there. And then again, it's nice that we have this whenever whenever it leaves the battlefield, so it works with web slinging as well as sort of protection for if your opponent tries to kill your creature that has modifications on it. You get to put +1/+1 counters on this. There have been some attempts at counters decks in the past. There's a ton of support for it in the Selesnya colors. I think the biggest problem is Selesnya's mana base is not great right now. There've also been some attempts at Golgari counters decks because of the Golgari Siege card from Tarkir Dragonstorm. Are you going to really go 3 colors, go into Abzan in order to just play this? I don't know. Maybe. That Siege does say, you know, if a creature you control with, I think specifically +1/+1, but it might be just counters, deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So this could be a way to put counters on things that might not otherwise have counters themselves, so that you don't have to, so that you can play that for its card draw instead of for its plus counters ability. I think it's close. It's close to playable. I've never been a huge fan of this type of, you know, counter strategy because you kind of go all in. It's kind of Voltron-y, and if you get blown out, you get blown out. So, not really my cup of tea, but I don't think that this is the worst card in the world. I've been saying that for a while. We'll eventually find a card that that I don't really enjoy. Daily Bugle Reporters. For 3 and a white, we have a creature, Human Citizen, at common. It is a 2/3 with when this creature enters. Either you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, or return target creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. This is a draft card. It can be a 4 mana 3/4 because it doesn't say 2 other. You could put one of the counters on itself. 4 mana for this effect is a little too much, and then you sort of get like a you know, an old school Gravedigger effect, but it's in white, so you have to limit it to 2 or less instead of in black, where you can get any creature, but it's not really something that you're going to see in standard. Flash Thompson, Spider Fan. For 1 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Human Citizen, at uncommon. Flash is a 2/2 with Flash, and then when Flash enters, choose one or both. You can either tap target creature or untap target creature. One thing to note is that if you decide to do both, they are done in the order that they are printed on the card. So if you, and they are both done in the order they're printed on the card, and they are done at the same time. Like there's not two separate triggers that go on the stack for like a tap and an untap trigger. You just have the enters trigger, and then you decide what, if that trigger resolves, you decide, do I want to do one, the other, or both, and then they happen. Why does that matter? Mainly, I think there's a card called Hemosimic Might in Standard right now, where if you wanted to, and what Hemosimic Might says is it's for single green mana, you get a 1/1 that has, whenever this creature becomes tapped, another target creature you control gets +X until end of turn, where X is the Hemosimic Might's power and toughness. Maybe it's just its power, but I know that it gives +X. If you say attacked with Hemosimic Might on, turn 2, and then your opponent attacks with a 2/2, and you're going to be like, oh, I'm going to Flash Thompson in, thinking that you could go, okay, I'm going to untap and tap the Hemosimic Might in order to give Flash Thompson +1/+1, it doesn't work that way, because the Hemosimic Might is already tapped. So you would tap it again, and when you're tapping a tapped thing, nothing happens. It doesn't trick, even though it's saying tap that creature, it's already tapped. So it's not like it gets another trigger regardless. It would just do nothing and then untap. And you could decide to trade with your Flash Thompson, but you wouldn't be able to get like a pump via that. You could, prior to attacks, play Flash Thompson during your main phase, cause the Hemosimic Might to tap and untap, trigger the Hemosimic Might's tap and untap in order to give something else +1/+1, and then attack again with the Hemosimic Might in order to give something else another Hemosimic Might trigger. But you can't change the order in which it's going to happen, is ultimately what I'm trying to get at. I still think it's an okay-ish card. Hemosimic Might's the only one that I can think of off the dome in Standard that has a specific tap trigger. There's certainly a lot of Survivor cards from Duskmourn that care about if they are tapped. They care about if they are tapped during your own second main. So this having flash is not really going to do too much. I think it's mostly you flash it in to have a surprise blocker or something like that. And you can choose different creatures. So you can have a surprise, you can flash it in to when your opponent moves to combat but haven't declared attackers yet, in order to prevent, some big thing of theirs from attacking, and untap something of yours so that if they have more than one creature, they're a little less incentivized to attack you that turn. So I think a fun card, could see a little bit of play in some sort of Azorius Flash style deck. I know people have been trying to do that type of deck for a little while now. I played for a while with Ash Lizzle's mono blue tempo deck, and that felt very good. Going Azorius, I think, is perfectly reasonable. So keep this card in mind. Next up is Friendly Neighborhood. For 3 and a white, we have an enchantment aura at rare. This is an enchant land aura that says when this aura enters, create 3 1/1 green and white human citizen creature tokens. And then enchanted land has for a single white and tap, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So it's 1 in tap, but you're really having to use 2 mana because you have to tap the land that friendly neighborhood is attached to, plus tap another land, likely another land, to actually pay for the cost in order to give something a big bump. And it's only sorcery speed, so you can't just swing out, wait for blocks, and then you're unblocked. Hey, I'm gonna pump it for a billion. I think ultimately this being 4 mana is a little high on the high end for this to be that playable in standard. It is 4 mana for 3 creatures. We already have Hop to it in standard, and that sees a little bit of play in your like Selesnya Rabbits list. But I saw a lot of that Selesnya Rabbits list post-rotation, mostly post-bannings, as people were trying to figure out what's the next direction for people who want to be playing aggressive. I think ultimately the power of the VV deck forced people who wanted to be aggressive to play anti-VV and stick with red, but I think given that Hop to it only really sees play in Rabbits decks and doesn't see that much play overall, being 1 mana cheaper, you're in a little bit of a rough shape. If you have some ways to bounce this, to flicker this, blink this, then maybe it gets a little bit better. But to me, 4 mana is a little too much. Next up is the Origins of Spider-Man, or I guess Origin of Spider-Man. For 1 and a white, we have an enchantment saga at rare. It has 3 chapters. I think there's a saga per color, and they're all just sort of very old school 3-chapter sagas. They don't flip into creatures or do anything fancy. They're not summons like from the Final Fantasy set. They're not creatures themselves. They're just pretty old school sagas. So chapter 1 on enter. On ETB, we create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. And then chapter 2, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It becomes a legendary spider hero in addition to its other types. And then chapter 3, target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. I think this card's... it's got a little bit of a History of Benalia feeling to me. It's not as good because it's not as much of an army in a can that History of Benalia was, but it is 1 cheaper. So it's really, you can think of it as I'm playing this 2 mana 2/1 with reach, and then I get additional value for it over the course of the next 2 turns. If you go 1 drop into this, it's very likely that you're going to be able to put a +1/+1 counter on something, and then having a turn 3, I'm just going to give something of mine double strike. Double strike, as we saw with the mouse deck, is very, very powerful. And putting people have been still playing versions of Boros Mice in standard, but I think having a way to have this target creature gains double strike for anything other than specifically mice. It is pretty darn nice. In the Boros Burn deck that I've been playing, you know, you have Boros Charm, being able to give your Slickshot Show Off double strike pretty easily leads to 10 damage in the air, plus whatever damage you might have dealt from the other instant or sorcery that you, or the other non-creature that you cast before the Boros Charm. Sure, this one, you're not triggering, you know, prowess or anything with this when it gets to chapter 3, but I think that this is a pretty good card. It's one to keep an eye on. Next up, we have one of our face cards from the set. We have Peter Parker. For 1 and a white, we have legendary creature Human Scientist Hero at Mythic. Peter is a 0/1 with, when Peter enters, you create a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. And for 1 and a green, white, and blue, so 4 total mana, you can transform Peter, but you can only activate it as a sorcery. So I always like to look at these flip cards, you know, thinking about one side versus the other side. These are going to be a little bit different, and we'll get to them. We'll get to the how these are different than what we've seen like in the Final Fantasy set when we talk about the backside. I think the front side of this card is already fairly good. It is 2 mana for, it's 2/2 worth of power and toughness, but it's across 2 bodies, and that's particularly good for the card Collector's Cage. Collector's Cage is an artifact from the Big Score, which is like the supplementary set that went with Outlaws of Thunder Junction. That said, you know, it's 1 and a white, Hideaway 5 for a single generic, and tap it. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Then if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, you can play the Hideaway card without paying its mana cost. And the whole idea behind that deck, because there have been a couple of decks, usually Selesnya, though there have been some Orzhov versions of the deck. The idea behind that deck is that you're playing a number of creatures that make multiple bodies, especially if you can make multiple bodies that have different powers and toughnesses, then you're pretty easily on your way to being able to flip the, or not flip, but being able to activate the cage and get whatever you hit underneath it. So the fact that this is a 2-drop that creates 2 different creatures with wildly different powers and toughness, this creating a 0/1 is particularly nice because there's not that many things, especially in the deck as it's constructed right now, that have 0 power. So it's going to be pretty easy. You're very unlikely to have multiple 0 power creatures on the battlefield. Sometimes you run into scenarios where you have multiple 1 power or multiple 3 power or multiple of a particular type, and it can be difficult to maneuver the cage in a way so that you actually get to play the Hideaway card. Not much is going to have 0 power. Dies to everything. Both sides of it die to the Nova Hellkite enters, so that's a bit annoying, though they're probably going to shoot the spider because it has reach, so they can get their 4 in, but regardless. And then we have this activated ability to flip it into something else. So I think on the front side, it's already decent enough. It is legendary, so you can't have multiple of them on the battlefield, but you could just play it. If you have a second one, you could just play it in order to get another 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. But regardless, the backside. Amazing Spider-Man. So you could have paid the transform cost, but these, in fact, are modal, they call them MDFCs, modal dual face cards. The backside, you see, has a mana cost in the top right corner. That means that if Peter Parker was in your hand, you could pay 1 and a white to play Peter Parker, or you could pay 1 a green, white, and blue to just cast Amazing Spider-Man directly from your hand. And then with the Peter Parker side, you could play Peter Parker and then later turn it into Amazing Spider-Man. You can't flip it from Amazing Spider-Man back into Peter Parker at any point. So it's only a one-way transformation. Other things to note here, specifically with the Cage deck, is because this is a modal dual face card, if you have some way to cheat the mana cost of this, like putting into Hideaway, or cascading into it, if we're going into like older formats, you have the opportunity, though cascading is different, is odd for that, but because they changed the rules for Cascade because of a broken interaction. But for something like Collector's Cage or something like Shiko, you could, if you have some way to make the front side free and cast it, not just put it onto the battlefield, but actually cast it, then you get to play the backside for free if you want to. So in particular the Cage deck, you play a Cage, you flip into, or you reveal, not reveal, you hide away Peter Parker underneath it, and then if you're able to activate Cage and play the thing for free, you can put out Amazing Spider-Man. If you Shiko a Peter Parker in your graveyard, you can cast Amazing Spider-Man. So those things are important to keep in mind when evaluating cards like this. Now, what exactly does Amazing Spider-Man do? So it's a legendary creature, human spider hero. It's a 4/4 with vigilance and reach, and each legendary spell you cast that's one or more colors has web slinging for a green, a white, and a blue. So that's legendary spell. So legendary planeswalkers, legendary artifacts or enchantments. My brain is mostly thinking about this Cage deck. I play like some sort of Bant Cage list. Cage was already playing Elspeth as one of its Cage hits. You can play Amazing Spider-Man in that list. You get Amazing Spider-Man on the battlefield, and then you can, bring something else back in order to cast an Elspeth for only 3 mana. One other thing to note, if you have a Peter Parker on the battlefield and you bring in Amazing Spider-Man, it's not going to cause Peter Parker to, or it's not going to cause you to have to sacrifice 1 to the, because for having multiple legendaries of the same type, because they aren't They don't have the same name, even though they're halves of the same card. I think this card's pretty darn good. I think of what we've seen, Arachne is also pretty good. But this slots into an already very powerful deck that's had some results in the past. You might have to alter the mana base a little bit. You probably already were having to change how you played that deck because Selesnya's mana base was so rough. And so by including in Bant, that gives you access to breeding pool. You don't have either Hallowed Fountain or not Secret Garden, whatever the green-white Shockland is. So you're still a little awkward because you're most often playing the Peter Parker side of this card, but it would be something that I would like to try out as from my deck building side. Next up is Rent is Due. For a single white, we have an enchantment at rare. It says at the beginning of your end step, you may tap 2 untapped creatures and or treasures you control. If you do, draw a card. Otherwise, sacrifice this enchantment. I think this is a very, very good flavor card. I don't really think it's that good. The biggest problem is if you can't pay the cost, you have to sacrifice it. So you have to wait until the cost can be paid before you start playing Rent is Due. So if I'm playing like a white weeding list and I want to include something, a way to give myself sort of a draw engine in order to, as like a sideboard option, in order to fight up against a control list, something like that. I can't just go, all right, turn 1, I'm going to get my Rent is Due down immediately so my opponent can't counter it because it just sacrifices itself. There is a little bit of synergy if you go like turn 4, Cosmogran Zenith, then play Rent is Due, get the double spell trigger from Cosmogran Zenith, create 2 1/1 tokens, and then you tap those 2 1/1 tokens in order to draw a card. I think you're jumping through a lot of hoops for something that you could just play Hylia from Edge of Eternities or Enduring Innocence. That's the name of the card, or Enduring Innocence in order to give yourself a much more reliable draw engine. And I don't think that there's really that much treasures going around in the set where you're going to be able to just play this and generate a bunch of treasures. Like I say the set, or in standard at all. Like Fountain Port, sure, makes treasures. Collector's Vault can make treasures. I don't really see it happening. So to me, this isn't really that playable. Next up, Selfless Police Captain. For 1 on a white, we have a creature human detective at common. It is a 1/1 that enters with +1/+1 counter, so it's really a 2/2. And when it leaves the battlefield, put its +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. So it's a web sling target. It's a limited card. Not much else to say here. Silver Sable, Mercenary Leader. For 2 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Human Mercenary Hero. At uncommon, it is a 2/3 that when it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature. And then when it attacks, target modified creature you control gains lifelink until end of turn. So the obvious idea, you play this, you have something else that you modify, and then the next turn you can attack, and along with that modified thing, you get a bunch of life. The fact that you can't put the +1/+1 counter on her, nor plus you also have to wait for her to attack in order to get to give a modified creature lifelink, not all modified creatures lifelink. It's a limited card. It's uncommon. It's a limited card. Next is Spectacular Spider-Man, and I tried looking. I believe this is the I shouldn't say the only printing. There's a ton of printings of this card, but this is the like base printing. There is no like, this is what this card would look like from a play booster. Like we saw, like we've seen all the other cards, what a typical Magic card would look like. It's all these borderless versions. So anyway, Spectacular Spider-Man. For 1 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Spider Human Hero at rare. It is a 3/2 with flash, and you can pay 1 generic in order to give it flying until end of turn. You can also pay 1 generic and sacrifice it in order to have creatures you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. I'm not going to say that this is like an incredible card, like the most busted card you've ever seen, but it is a perfectly fine role player, especially if you're doing that Azorius Flash deck that we were talking about. 2 mana for 3/2, flash this in. You do have to pay to give it flying, but if you're playing a flash deck, you're really, for the most part, keeping the board fairly clear, and then if it does get a little out of hand, then you can start putting that 1 into it in order to jump over your opponent's blockers, and then just using this as protection. 3 total mana to blank somebody's removal, or the obvious dream is flash this in and blank somebody's board wipe, and they're just devastated. This is a perfectly good, reasonable card. Spectacular Tactics. For 1 on the white, we have an instant at common. It says choose 1, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn, or destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. An extremely good sideboard and or best of 1 card. Main deck removal that is also main deck protection, or a sideboard slot that you could bring in against removal heavy matchups, or if your opponent has something like if they're trying to do Kona things. This can kill a Kona. This can kill, really, Kona's the big one that I'm thinking of. Is there anything else? Or power, like it could kill a Surak, but like, oh, you really wanted to do that. It could kill an Outcast Trailblazer or a Temur Battlecrier. It could kill a lumbering, whatever you call it, lumbering battle wagon, world wagon, whatever it's called. The one that ETB attack, on ETB or attack, you ramp a basic. Just an absolutely fine role player. Next up is Spider-Man Web Slinger. For 2 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Spider Human Hero at common. It is a 3/3 with web slinging for a single white. This is a draft card for the most part. Only other notable thing is we'll see. For a while we didn't have, like, we only had like one common legendary. I think it was from Modern Horizons 3. And I don't know if they've printed a ton more, but they're adding a number of common legendaries in this set. I don't really think that they're going to get to a point in quote-unquote Pauper Commander where you're really playing like literally Pauper Commanders. Because unless you really wanted to play like an extremely powered down version of that format, I think you would probably still allow uncommon commanders, but maybe if they go super deep and they separate it to Prince and Pauper, then you're starting to get closer to the ability to play true Pauper Commander. Nothing else to really say about this. Yeah, it's a 1-mana 3/3, but you've got Arachne, who is significantly better than Spider-Man. More Spider-Man. We have Spider UK. For 3 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Spider Human Hero at uncommon. He's a 3/4 with web slinging for 2 and a white. And at the beginning of your end step, if 2 or more creatures enter the battlefield under your control this turn, you draw a card and gain a life. So, Spider UK itself entering the battlefield, and something else. Sort of a card draw-ish engine. A little too expensive for standard. Starling, Aerial Ally. For 4 and a white, we have a legendary creature, Human Hero at common. Again, another common legendary. She is a 3/4 with flying. That when the Starling enters, another target creature you control gains flying until end of turn. This is a draft card that has been reprinted a million times. This is probably worse than a lot of the versions of it because it's a legendary. So it'll be fine and limited, but that's it. Sudden Strike. For 1 and a white, we have an instant at uncommon. Destroy target attacking or blocking creature. We already have Ride's End, which essentially is doing the same thing to attacking creatures. It's exiling target creature, normally costs 5 mana, but it's reduced by 3 if the target is tapped. Which, I guess, you know, if your opponent is playing something with Vigilance, then this is a little bit better than Ride's End, but for 90% of the scenarios that you're having to deal with, it is equivalent. If, like, Jeskai Control suddenly starts getting really, really good again, then maybe Sudden Strike beats out something like Ride's End. But Ride's End doesn't even see a ton of play anymore because Beanstalk was banned. Other part would be blocking. Things that destroy blocking creatures. It's so awkward because your opponent, you had to let your opponent block, which means unless you have trample already, at which point they're not incentivized to block to begin with, but unless you had trample already, you destroying their blocking creature doesn't allow you to get your damage in. Sure, if they're like overconfidently blocking with their big beefy, you know, Beza or something like that, then you can kill that thing and allow clears the way a little bit for your aggressive deck, but you still let them block. They still were able to get something, some value from Beza outside of the enters the battlefield trigger, and it's just not really that good. So I don't really see this seeing a ton of play. Next up, we have Thwip. For a single white, we have an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end of turn. And if it's a spider, you gain 2 life. Limited combat trick. Don't really see much more. Next is Web Up. For 2 and a white, we have an enchantment at common. When this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. It's just a renamed version of Banishing Light. Banishing Light is already in standard, and I was going to say it doesn't see any play. An extremely small amount of play. Mostly sees play when people don't want to play Get Lost. Next is Web Shooters. For 1 on white, we have an artifact equipment at uncommon. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has reach, and whenever this creature attacks, tap target creature and opponent controls, and it has an equip cost of 2 generic. If this ETB'd and attached to something, then we'd be dealing with pretty decent equipment. Always on attack, tap something is pretty good for an aggressive deck, because your opponent can't just play their Beza or play one big blocker and reasonably be able to deal with your board, prevent you from continuing your attacks. But the fact that this is just an equipment that you have to play and then pay an additional 2 in order to equip it to something, not gonna get there. Wild Pack Squad. For 2 and a white, we have a creature human mercenary at common. It's a 2/3 with at the beginning of combat on your turn, up to 1 target creature gains first strike and vigilance until end of turn. The target itself, which is nice, but this is a limited card. Not much else to say. Next is with Great Power. For 3 and a white, we have an enchantment aura at rare. It says enchant creature you control. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it, and all damage that would be dealt to you is dealt to enchanted creature instead. If this is the only aura that you have attached to that particular creature, then this is 4 mana +2/+2, and it takes all your damage. Not that great. I think for the most part, this is a commander card. Maybe in some kind of like Voltron-y, Boggles style deck, in like there's Light Paws decks in Pioneer, and maybe even there's straight up Boggles in Modern. 4 mana is a pretty expensive. It is +2/+2. Maybe if you're like in some, maybe it's like a sideboard card in Boggles if you're in like against a very aggressive opponent, but Boggles often is playing, unflinching courage, ways to gain a ton of life, or ways to give their creature lifelink, which is a very good way to race against an aggressive opponent. So I don't really see it. So we're done with all white. So only 24 cards in white. Like I said, a very small set. I think there's only 193 cards overall. Still took an hour, so it might Might not be able to get through the whole set one stream, but we'll try. Our first blue card, Amazing Acrobatics. For 1 blue. We have an instant at common that says choose one or both, counter target spell, and tap 1 or 2 target creatures. One of the most insane cancel variants we've ever seen printed. This being a common is ridiculous if you've played this game for any length of time. It's not better than 3 Steps Ahead, but it's kind of a mini what's the card? In my head and then I lost it. It starts with a C. Cryptic Command. It's kind of a mini Cryptic Command. Counter target spell. Cryptic Command would tap all creatures an opponent controls. This taps only 2. Often, especially on turn 3, often that's their whole board. You can also tap your own things if, for whatever reason, that's important to you. And it's a cancel variant that is not dead if your opponent's just not casting into your open mana. Again, that Azorius Flash deck that we've been talking about. You play this instead of 3 Steps Ahead, or maybe this 1 or 2 copies of this in addition to 3 Steps Ahead, in order to, and your opponent isn't casting into it, but they have creatures on the battlefield. Hey, use this offensively. In step, tap your 2, tap your blockers, swing in for lethal. So it's not just dead if your opponent is not playing into your counter magic. So pretty good card, especially for common. Beetle, Legacy Criminal. For 3 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Rogue Villain at common. It is a 3/3 flyer with, for 1 and a blue, and exile this card from your graveyard. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So that second ability is really the renew ability from it's the renew ability from Tarka Dragonstorm, the Sultai ability. Just without the, flavor word of renew. Ultimately, this card's a 4-mana 3/3 flyer. It's not really making it there in standard, but it is interesting that we're seeing renew come back in this set. Next, Chameleon, Master of Disguise. For 3 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Shapeshifter Villain at uncommon. It is a 2/3 that you may have Chameleon enter as a copy of a creature you control, except his name is Chameleon, Master of Disguise. And it has Mayhem for 2 and a blue. So before we talk about Mayhem, this is a as it enters thing. So just like with Arachne, you don't have, if you let Chameleon resolve, you don't have the ability to destroy the thing that it copies, so that it's trying to copy, so that it can't be that thing and it just stays as Chameleon. Obviously, if there's only 1 creature on the battlefield, when you have only 1 creature on your opponent's side, when they play a Chameleon, you can just kill that creature as Chameleon's resolving, and then they played a 4-mana 2/3, which is awful. But note that it retains its name, so if you can have it copy a legendary, and there'd be two different legendaries that have the same characteristics, except their name is different, so they would not legend roll each other. And then Mayhem. This is our first appearance of Mayhem. It is the villain's ability. Web slinging was the hero's ability for the set. So Mayhem is for 2 and a blue on this card. But what Mayhem does is you may cast this card from your graveyard for its Mayhem cost, in Chameleon's case 2 into blue. If you discarded it this turn, and timing rules still apply. Interesting that they say timing rules still apply here, mostly because this is very similar, just like how web slinging was very similar to ninjutsu. Mayhem is very similar to an old mechanic called Madness, and Madness had a lot of weird rules around it, where it's you're casting cards for its Madness cost if it was discarded. There are a lot of weird rules because it's being discarded, and so you're being discarded is this weird like in-between state, and it allowed you to play things that normally wouldn't have, based on its timing, you wouldn't have been able to play it, but because you're paying its Madness cost, you would be able to pay it. Here they're just like, hey, Mayhem, it's not Madness. Don't think of it like Madness. Reminder, you can't just play this creature at instant speed unless it had flash. Unless it specifically had flash. But unlike Madness, where if you discarded it, you have that opportunity at that exact point to pay for its Madness cost. And if you decide to not do it, you don't get a chance later. With Mayhem, you could, for example, play something like say you have 5 mana and you play Fear of Missing Out, discarding Chameleon. And Chameleon is your only creature in the graveyard in order to give you Delirium. So you don't really want to cast Chameleon immediately in order to, something else that you have that has Delirium. Because you want to go to attacks, because you have another Fear of Missing Out, or you have some other reason to for Chameleon to be in the graveyard during your combat step. You're able to leave it in the graveyard during your combat step, attack with your other Fear of Missing Out, get multiple combats, etc., do whatever you want to do with it. And then post-combat, still have the opportunity to play Chameleon for its Mayhem cost. That's the big benefit to Mayhem, that if you have like sorcery speed discard outlets, you aren't sort of forced to pay essentially a kicker and use your Mayhem stuff at that exact moment. You're allowed to, see the card that you drew, or go into combat, or do a bunch of other things that before you decide, oh, let me play the Mayhem card, or oh, I'd rather just spend my mana on this, that, or the other. As far as this card goes, I don't really think it's that playable. There has been, a Battlecry combo list that uses a lot of these type of clone effects in order to sort of draw their whole deck, and then give everything haste and give all their cloned things that they made haste and swing for lethal. For the most part, that deck isn't playing a ton of discard outlets, so it's not really going to be better than something like a Visage Bandit that it already plays. So I don't really see Chameleon seeing a ton of play. You can argue, hey, it's 2 VVs. It's another copy of VV. No. I don't really see it. I think this is mostly unplayable in standard. Speaking of clones, we have the Clone Saga for 3 and a blue. We have a Enchantment Saga, so here's our blue saga. Has 3 chapters. First chapter is Surveil 3. Note, Surveil, if you surveil something with madness, or sorry, mayhem, that doesn't allow you to play it because it wasn't discarded, it was just put into your, it was surveilled. Chapter 2, when you next cast a creature spell this turn, copy it, except the copy isn't legendary. Then chapter 3, choose a card name. Whenever a creature with the chosen name deals combat damage to a player, this turn, draw a card. So you play this on turn 4, you play something on turn 5, you get 2 copies of it. Turn 6, you name the thing that you got 2 copies of, attack with them. If they hit, you get to draw 2 cards in that case. It has to be a card name, so I don't believe that you can name just like soldier or human in order to have like all of your tokens draw cards if they connect with against your opponent. I don't really think that this card's that good in any way, shape, or form. It's more clone shenanigans for commander decks. Yeah, somebody's gonna have to find a way to break this for me to be convinced that there's anything that's of value here. Next up is Doc Ock, Sinister Scientist. For 4 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Scientist Villain at common. Doc Ock is a 4/5. As long as there are 8 or more cards in your graveyard, so as long, special 7 or 8. Whatever. As long as there are 8 or more cards in your graveyard, Doc Ock has power and toughness, base power and toughness 8/8. And as long as you control another villain, Doc Ock has hexproof. Both of those abilities, especially the hexproof one, is pretty powerful. But if you don't have either of that, then it's a 4 mana 4/5, and even if you do, ultimately it is just a big idiot. Sure, you don't have to worry about your opponent having, you know, targeted removal for it, but they can chump block it for the rest of time, and it gets swept up like any other creature. So, Draft Chaff, mostly unplayable. Doc Ock's Henchman. For 2 and a blue, we have a creature Human Villain. At common, it is a 2/1 with flash. That's whenever this creature attacks, it connives. So this is a returning mechanic. Conniving is you draw a card, then discard a card. So kind of looting, what we've seen before. But if you discard a non-land card, you can put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. 3 mana for a 2/1 flash with no evasion. We have Brineborn Cutthroat from that's in Foundations right now. Was part of the beginner's box in Foundations, which means it actually is legal in Standard. It's a 2 mana 2/1 with flash that also grows. That also has the ability to grow, and that doesn't see a ton of play. It sees some amount of play in this theoretical Azorius Flash list, but doesn't see a ton of play. Most people are just playing Floodpits Drowner instead of something like Brineborn Cutthroat. And as well, you have Floodpits Drowner, which is a 2 mana 2/1 that has a lot more going on for it. I don't really see this seeing play, even in that theoretical Azorius Flash list. Flying Octobot. For 1 and a blue, we have an artifact creature, Robot Villain, at uncommon. It is a 1/1 flyer. That's whenever another villain you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. This ability triggers only once each turn. It is an artifact. It does have evasion and it does have the ability to grow. I just don't think there's enough villains. My understanding is that they are the sort of overarching theme with the Universes Beyond sets. I have to go look back to see if like Sephiroth is a villain, has a villain creature type, but my understanding is the overarching theme is between this set of Universes Beyond sets in Standard is that they're going to be heroes and villains. So maybe if you get like a bunch more villains, maybe if you get token villains that you can create, then the ability to really grow this. It is limited once per turn, so if you can create token villains, it's not really going to do a ton, but I'm trying to convince myself, and I don't think that it makes it. Hide on the Ceiling. For X and a blue, we have an instant at rare that says exile X target artifacts and or creatures. Return the exiled cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So a powerful effect. Similar-ish to like Another Round, which already exists in Standard. But cheaper if you have a few things on the battlefield. More expensive if you have a bunch of things on the battlefield. One thing to note, this can target your opponent's stuff. So if your opponent has tokens, this would remove those tokens. At X is equal to 2, this is a similar rate to a card called Ghostly Flicker, which saw a decent amount of play in its Standard at the time. We did see people try at the beginning of Standard doing like Esper Warp stuff with Splash Portal. The problem here is, in order to do the same thing with Splash Portal, or in order to do the same sort of Esper Warp stuff, where you play something for its warp cost and then Splash Portal it so that it comes back with and doesn't get warped, so that you get the full price creature that sticks around instead of leaving the battlefield. It costs 2. Whereas Splash Portal costs only 1, and that it costing 1 is the important thing there. Like there is in Modern, there is the Esper Blink or the Orzhov Blink or archetypes that use Ephemerate and things like that. Mostly because they have access to a large number of 1 mana blink effects, flicker effects, etc., etc. There are things like Starfield Vocalist, and there are a number of pretty good Into the Battlefield triggers. Maybe there's a deck where you're just playing a bunch of Into the Battlefield trigger stuff. You're playing like Jills in order to bounce things to your opponent's hand and stuff like that. And use this to sort of do Yorion style shenanigans. maybe there's a deck around that in Standard. If you do like Temur Battle Crier type stuff, you can really reduce the cost of X so that you can do this for 1. That seems like a lot of setup. I think that there's some sort of blink deck that you can do with Hide on the Ceiling. But I don't know if our standard format is conducive for it right now. Next is Hydro-Man, Fluid Felon for 2 blue. So that is blue. 2 blue pips. We have a legendary creature, Elemental Villain, at rare. It is a 2/2 with whenever you cast a blue spell, if Hydro-Man is a creature, he gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And then at the beginning of your end step, untap Hydro-Man. Until your next turn, he becomes a land and gains tap, add a blue. He is not a creature during that time. I looked at the release notes. From my understanding on the release notes, if you play Hydro-Man on turn 2, on your opponent's turn, when Hydro-Man is a land, you would have the ability to tap it. So you could play Hydro-Man and have access to 1 extra blue mana to hold up like a Spell Pierce or a Into the Flood Maw. We've been talking about the Azorius Flash list. I don't think that it quite works. It's not quite the same as Brineborn Cutthroat, because you would need to be casting those spells on your turn in order to start growing this a ton. But I do think that this card is fairly powerful, especially in some kind of like blue control list. You can't have multiple of them. If you could have if this was not legendary, I think this card gets very, very good, because you could have multiple of them, and then you basically, every opponent's turn, for as many of these things that you have access to that much mana. But this does leave you with essentially always 1 mana up, at least 1 mana up, for as long as he's on the battlefield. So if your opponent, if you're sitting there, you're able to sit there and play both attack with this and hold up Spell Pierces, or hold up, you leave 1 mana left additionally over. Hold up dispelling exhales, or no more lies, hold up counter spells, quench style effects, and have this just be your 1 beater to get through. This sort of kind of tempo with it. I think that this can be a decent card. I don't think that you should really take too much of an effort to try and like turbo grow him, because you're doing it on your turn. I think you should instead, maybe the game's going long enough and you get the opportunity to play a stock up, and that can increase the clock, or you have some sneak in some opportunities to play things at sorcery speed, or other creatures, or whatever have you, in order to grow it. But you shouldn't be trying to turbo grow it. And then it just gives you access to a little more mana. more than your opponent thinks. It's kind of rampish, but you only get access to that mana on your opponent's turn. I think this card's sneakily pretty good. Next up, we have Imposter Syndrome. For 4 blue, we have an enchantment at Mythic. Whenever a non-token creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. It's the meme. It's the Spider-Man pointing meme. This is Commander nonsense. It doesn't exponentially grow because you're making token copies of the thing that hit. So if those tokens hit, they're not making more copies. They're only the original makes copies. So it only linearly grows, and you had to spend 6 mana in order to do this. No, not seeing it. Lady Octopus, Inspired Inventor. For a single blue, we have a legendary creature, Human Scientist. Human Scientist villain at rare. She is an 0/2 with whenever you draw your first or second card on each turn. Or each turn, no on there. Whenever you draw your first or second card each turn, put an Ingenuity counter on Lady Octopus. And then you can tap to... and she has an activated ability of tap. You may cast an artifact spell from your hand with mana value less than or equal to the number of Ingenuity counters on Lady Octopus without paying its mana cost. A lot to unpack with this card. So, if you're on the draw, well, the first card, unless you can somehow get this card in at instant speed, the first card that you draw each turn is likely your draw step. So unless it was already on the battlefield, you're only going to get one Ingenuity counter on it the first turn that it comes into play. Because even if you go like Lady Octopus Opt or Lady Octopus Charter Course, right? Charter Course is draw 2, discard 1, unless you attacked. Then you don't discard any. Even though that's draw 2, you already drew your first card on your draw step. So you would only get the second counter from Charter Course, as it is your second and third card that you drew that turn. But if it's on the battlefield and you don't have to play anything, and you would draw for your turn and you would get an Ingenuity counter. Or if you play it holding up mana in play like Opt or some instant speed card draw, maybe Quick Draw from Outlaws of Thunder Junction to draw, which is instant speed divination. You draw 2. And it has to be draw. It can't be Consult the Star Charts. Consult the Star Charts puts the card into your hand. In those cases, you would get both counters from the 2 cards that you drew, because you likely didn't draw anything else. Second thing to talk about with this card is, unlike web slinging, this does give you a window in which you can play artifact spells that you would normally be able to only play at sorcery speed at instant speed. This, when you activate it, it introduces a window in which you are able to play an artifact spell of mana value less than or equal to the number of Ingenuity counters you have on Lady Octopus immediately. Essentially gives any artifact spell that you have in your hand flash for that window. You get to do it for free. That's pretty powerful. but it needs to a build around. This is definitely a brewer's card. I can't think of off the dome where you would put this. There are the Azorius or Jeskai artifact decks in the standard that are doing like the Simulacrum synthesizer stuff. But that deck's already playing at sorcery speed. You're also playing Pinnacle Star Cages in that deck. So like you'd be eating your own Lady Octopus. So you're playing these Pinnacle Star Cages in order to let you live long enough so that you can get your big army of Karnstructs so that you can swing in the game. And you would just be eating your own Lady Octopus here. Possibly in like some sort of affinity style deck in order to turbo out a bunch of cheap artifacts. You play Lady Octopus on turn 1, turn 2, you go 1-drop artifact, tap Lady Octopus. Maybe even like I doubt that there is a 1-drop artifact that replaces itself in standard. But you play a 1-drop artifact, you play another 1-drop, or you tap Lady Octopus in order to play another 1-drop, and then maybe you have enough artifacts in play so that you can power something out with affinity. It's kind of similar to what you would think about with like an Aether Vial. It's a little bit better than Aether Vial in the sense that with Aether Vial, you were limited to the exact number of charge counters on the Aether Vial. For the mana value of the card that you're playing had to be equal to the exact number of charge counters on the Aether Vial, and so you sort of. But Aether Vial was also not legendary, so you play multiple Aether Vials and have them leave them at particular charge counter spots in order to play multiple things in a turn at flash, speeds. This being legendary means you can't play a bunch of Lady Octopuses and get a bunch of things down, but you are not limited to the exact number of ingenuity counters. She can grow much quicker than an Aether Vial because you can put multiple ingenuity counters on Lady Octopus at a time. If you're building around it, you can even do it on your opponent's turn, so that you can get a really high amount of ingenuity counters. And maybe that's the other way to build Lady Octopus, if there's some high-end artifact that you're trying to get down, maybe an Instone, maybe a Chimmel, something like that, and you're just trying to turbo the number of ingenuity counters on her so that you can play that and then still hold up mana to protect the game plan that you're going for. Maybe that's the brew around it. It's definitely a brewer's card and an interesting card to look at. Next up we have Madam Web, Clairvoyant. For 4 blue, we have a legendary creature Mutant Advisor at uncommon. She is a 4/4 with, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast spider spells and non-creature spells from the top of your library, and whenever you attack, you may mill a card. 6 mana for a future sight on a creature. but you're limited to spiders for your creatures and non-creatures. You're not able to play lands off the top, and you're not able to cast non-spider creatures off the top. You do have the ability to attack to clear the top of your library, so that maybe, you know, the land that was on top or the non-spider that was on top gets out of the way. But 6 mana is too expensive. Too expensive for this type of effect. Mysterio, Master of Illusion. For 3 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, human villain at rare. Mysterio is a 3/3 that when it enters, you create a 3/3 blue illusion villain creature token for each non-token villain you control. Exile those tokens when Mysterio leaves the battlefield. So if Mysterio himself is a villain, so if you have an empty board and you play Mysterio, it's 4 mana for 6/6 worth of power across 2 bodies. Already decent. If you can curve villains into Mysterio, get a huge board. The big issue is they just have to have removal for Mysterio in order to clear the whole board of your illusions. They don't have to play a board wipe. They can just kill Mysterio. So to me, this is very similar in feel to Master of Waves, which is a card from Mono Blue Devotion back during Theros block. It was something like, it was either 2 and a blue or maybe even 3 and a blue for a pro red. I think it was a 2/1 that created a number of 1/0 elemental creature tokens equal to your devotion to blue. And then you might think, okay, well, they're 1/0s. Would they just die immediately? Well, no, because Master of Waves, I think, gave elementals +1/+1. So very similar in idea. You create this huge board with your Master of Waves, but really it's, hey, if they can just kill the Master of Waves, then the huge board goes away. Same way, kill Mysterio, the huge board goes away. A little bit different, and because, well, this is similar to the Master of Waves, right? If you had other things on the battlefield, they're not going away, but you get rid of the huge number, in this case, of 3/3s versus the huge number of 2/1s with the Master of Waves. I still think that this is close, especially if there's some sort of curve out villains deck. It's a must answer threat. You almost certainly win the next turn. So how many 4-drops can you say that about in Standard? Probably a lot. So maybe I'm overvaluing it, but that is a lot of power and toughness in the right deck. More Mysterio cards. Mysterio's Phantasm. For 1 and a blue, we have a creature illusion villain at common. It's a 1/3 with flying and vigilance, and whenever it attacks, mill a card. It's a limited card. Not much else to see here. Next up is Norman Osborn. Here is our flip card for blue, our MDFC for blue. For 1 and blue, we have a 1/1 legendary creature, human scientist villain at Mythic. Norman cannot be blocked. and whenever he deals combat damage to a player, he connives. And then you can transform him for 1 a blue, a black, and a red. So 1 and a Grixis, 4 total mana. The front side is okay. We've seen a little bit of play from, I forget the name of the card, but it's a 1 in blue, 1/1 unblockable enchantment creature from Duskmourn. I've seen it show up a few times in like your Selesnya mid-range lists that are playing Ouroboros and the Xenomorph Imago. Where you're just trying to get something that gets through. I've also seen that card show up in Azorius Eerie lists, but that's specifically because it's an elemental. Oh, sorry, because it's an enchantment. Norman wouldn't really work in that. But it is a 2-drop that sculpts your hand and can grow. It's in the right colors for your VV lists, and it has the ability to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. So if you could attack with Norman, it's gonna get through because it can't be blocked unless they specifically remove it. You discard VV, put a +1/+, you draw a card and discard a VV. That's a non-land card that you put into the graveyard. You put a +1/+1 counter on Norman. Next turn, you play your Agatha Soul Cauldron, exile the VV. If you had like a 1-drop that didn't have a +1/+1 counter on it already, you could put that on there, and Norman would have access to the VV activated ability. Not to mention the whole new Mayhem mechanic. This is a way for you to discard cards with Mayhem. Fairly regularly. And then you can transform. And it's transforming. It's unlike, we didn't have to worry about this with Peter Parker, but there's a couple of cards that the couple of these Moldal Dual Face cards that they have the ability to put +1/+1 counters on themselves, and this is unlike some of the transform effects that we saw in Final Fantasy, is the dominance particularly. This just transforms the card. It doesn't exile and then come back transformed. So any +1/+1 counters that were on Norman stay on Norman if you transform it, if you flip it. So what is the backside? The Green Goblin. Again, you could just pay 1 a blue, a black, and a red to put the Green Goblin directly into play from your hand. You don't have to play Norman Osborn and then flip it, because this is an MDFC. As well, if you have some way, just like with Peter, if you have some way to cheat out Peter, cheat cast Peter, or cheat cast Norman, you also have the ability to cheat cast Green Goblin. But what do we get? We get a legendary creature, Goblin Human Villain at Mythic. It's a 3/3. Flying Menace. Spells you cast from your graveyard cost 2 generic less to cast. That's Mayhem cards are being cast from your graveyard. Anything with Flashback is being cast from your graveyard. Anything with Harmonize is being cast from your graveyard. And anything else that has specific weirdness. It wouldn't reduce Renew, because that's not a spell that you're casting. That is an activated ability from the graveyard. So things like Renew or Rubble Belt Maverick, things like that, are activated abilities from the graveyard. and they would not get reduced. And then Goblin Formula. Each non-land card in your graveyard has Mayhem, and the Mayhem cost is equal to its mana cost. This card is very, very good, but also, like Lady Octopus, I think really requires building around. Maybe requires building around. You could just do like Grixis midrange. You're playing Green Goblin, you're like trying to curve Fear of Missing Outs and Tursas into Green Goblins and Kefkas, and they're all doing this discard shenanigans, and then you put everything that you put into your graveyard has Mayhem because of Green Goblins, so you get, even though you're discarding it, you don't lose access to it. And sure, it is. I was gonna say it's not reduced by like a lot of Mayhem cards are, but it is reduced because it's 2 generic less. So as long as it has some generic cost in its mana cost, Green Goblin's making it cheaper. This is a really, really powerful card. The worst thing that you can say about it is its body, and its body isn't that bad. 4 mana for a 3/3 flying menace, double evasion. There's also nothing that is often when you see these like limiting or these mana cost reduction things, there would be some limits say, you know, this can't reduce its mana cost to less than 1 generic or whatever. There's nothing doing that here. So if you have things that only cost generic mana, only cost 2 generic, that's free if it was put into your graveyard this turn. So there's a lot to like about Green Goblin. I'm gonna love trying to brew with this card. I'm gonna love to see what other people brew with this card. A very powerful effect. And I think unlike Amazing Spider-Man / Peter Parker, I think the Norman Osborn's fine. I don't think it's going to replace like Fear of Missing Out in like your VV decks, but maybe you play like 1 or 2 copies in your VV deck. I think the star of the show here is Green Goblin. Next up is Oscorp Research Team. For 3 in a blue, we have a creature human scientist at common. It is a 1/5 with 6 generic and a blue, so 7 total mana. You can draw 2 cards. You don't have to tap it. If you somehow have 14 mana, you get to draw 4 cards. 2 activations with this. This is very much a limited control card. The board gets stalled. You have an Oscorp Research Team. You're just going to bury your opponent in card advantage and eventually find a way to close out the game. But that's really all you're getting from this card. Next up, Robotics Mastery. For 4 and a blue, we have an enchantment aura at uncommon. It has flash, and it's an enchant creature. And when this aura enters, create 2 1/1 colorless robot artifact creature tokens with flying, and enchanted creature gets +2/+2. 5 mana is way too much to spend for this. Yeah, not much else to say here. School Days. For 3 blue, that's 5 total mana, we have an instant at uncommon. It says choose one, either draw 3 cards or counter target spell and draw a card. I kind of like this card. I think it's Jace's Ingenuity. 5 mana, draw 3. I think Jace's Ingenuity was already instant speed, but maybe it was sorcery speed. But then also you can use it to counter a spell, and you still get to replace School Days because you get to draw a card. So it's a 2-for-1. You countered their spell for the cost of this card, and you drew a card. I wouldn't play a ton of this in some sort of like Azorius control list, but I might play one copy of this. Next up, Secret Identity. For a single blue, we have an instant at uncommon. It says choose one. Either until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a citizen with base power and toughness 1/1 and gains hexproof. Or until end of turn, target creature you control becomes a hero with base power and toughness 3/4 and gains flying and vigilance. So this is kind of shore up, you know, which or magic damper, which are both are basically the same card. But you can also use it offensively. You know, you before combat, cast this on your thing, it jumps, it has vigilance, so you're not leaving yourself vulnerable to a crackback. And as long as you're putting it on something that's less than 3/4, then you're hitting for more than it would have. I think for the most part, you're holding it up as, you know, to blank somebody's removal, but in a pinch, it can help you with your Alpha Strike to finish your opponent off. Perfectly fine card. Other thing to note, this is 1 mana in blue to increase something's power. So in a VV deck, you don't, in like the VV prowess lists, I think for the current VV Cauldron lists are pretty tight, but in like your VV prowess list, you could Secret Identity onto your VV very similarly to what you do with a Wild Ride. You're not going to give it haste, but you are giving it this temporary boost of power in order to make it so that you have more access to more mana out of the VV. So, I think it's a pretty good card. Next is Spider Bite Web Warden. For 2 and a blue, we have a legendary creature, Spider Avatar Hero. At uncommon, she is a 2/2 with return. When Spider Bite enters, return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. This is just Jill. I think it's the exact same text as Jill. It's also legendary, but it doesn't have the upside that Jill has and that you can flip it into Shiva. If you're really looking for this effect, just play Jill. Spider-Man No More. For 1 and a blue, we have an enchantment aura at common. It's an enchant creature. Enchanted creature is a citizen with base power and toughness 1/1. It has defender and loses all other abilities. It also loses all other creature types. We already have witness protection. We already have unable to scream. This is 2 mana version of that. This is really a limited card. Not much else to say here. Next, Spider Sense. For 1 and a blue, we have an instant at rare. It has web slinging for a single blue. So interestingly, this is our first instance of web slinging on a non-creature. And it says counter target instant, sorcery, or triggered ability. So very similar to negate, but it misses the non-creature permanents, which is probably backbreaking for this card. Sure, you can web sling, and then you have sort of a kind of better spell pierce. Really, it's only better if you can maneuver yourself to the point where you can web sling this, and your opponent would have had enough mana to pay for the additional 2 that Spell Pierce would have forced them to pay. If it hit triggered and activated abilities, maybe we're talking about something, but I think you probably just want to play negate. I think you probably just want to play negate if you are in control, and I think you probably just want to play Spell Pierce if you're like a tempo deck. Because for the most part, it's going to do a lot of the same things. Spell Pierce, you're playing to the board, and you want to protect from a sweeper. Spell Pierce is often going to do that in the crucial turns of the game. And if you're playing control, negate covers everything but the triggered abilities, which isn't going to prevent an Agatha's Soul Cauldron from being activated. It isn't going to prevent a Kaido from being ninjutsu'd, because ninjutsu is an activated ability. It really is only going to stop an already resolved, like, Profts from triggering, or like a FOMO from going. This isn't going to stop an opponent from activating their VV to get all that extra mana. I think you just play negate in control, and you play Spell Pierce in tempo or aggressive blue-based decks. Next is Unstable Experiment. For 1 and a blue, we have an instant at common. Target player draws a card, then up to 1 target creature you control connives. This is... I think this is better than you think. If you have a creature, this is instant speed shard, of course. Something that was confusing to me, but now I understand why, is you have target player draws, and then target creature, up to 1 target creature you control connives. They have it written this way, not because you would ever really target your opponent to draw the card, but if it just said draw a card, then up to 1 target creature you control connives, if you, when you put this onto the stack, and you go, you have to, if it didn't say target player, if it just said then up to 1 target creature you control connives, you would put this onto the stack, say this is the creature that's going to connive, and then your opponent kills that creature, then all targets of that spell are no longer valid targets, and so the spell would be countered. But because you can target yourself, because you're forced to target the player to draw a card and target up to 1 creature, if you go, okay, I'm targeting myself to draw a card and targeting the creature to connive, and they kill the creature in response, you would still draw the 1 card because there would still be a valid legal target for the spell upon resolution, and it wouldn't be countered. That's why even though it's kind of weird that it says target player and then target creature, and you're almost never going to make your opponent draw a card, it means that it's not going to be countered if they kill the creature. Anyways, I think if you have a creature, this is 2 mana draw. This is kind of 2 mana draw 2, discard 1. Again, like I said, Chart, of course, at instant speed, and possibly better, because you can discard a non-land to give your creature +1/+1. I think this is a decent card. I could see this in that Azorius Flash list that we've been talking about, rather than Chart, of course, because you can just hold up mana if your opponent's not playing anything, because they don't want it to get countered. For like a Flash list, you're more likely going to be wanting just card volume than you're wanting card quality. So sure, you could just play Consult the Star Charts, but on turn 2, that's just like a 2 mana instant speed, 2 mana instant speed, sleight of hand. Whereas this draws you to, you can dump like a land and maybe drew. You're getting this card volume on there. So I think this is a pretty playable card. Next is Whoosh. For 1 in the blue, we have an instant at common. It has Kicker for 1 in the blue. This is the first instance of Kicker. It's a returning mechanic. It's just you can pay the kicker cost, in this case 1 in the blue, as you cast it. And generally there's some additional effect if you paid the kicker cost. So here it's return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and if the spell is kicked, draw a card. This is a functional reprint of a card called Into the Royal, which I believe is in standard right now, and sees no play. It's a card that has seen play in the past. It's not a bad card, but I think Into the Flood Maw kind of eats its lunch. So, yeah. Functional reprint of a card that has seen play in the past, but there's just a better version of this effect in the standard right now. And I think I'm actually going to call it here at black, rather than continue. Feeling a bit hungry, wanted to get some food in me, and there's still quite a few to go through. We've been through 49. We still have 150 to go through, so we're still gonna have to break this up over multiple days. Even if I powered through, I think through 4 hours, we wouldn't be completely finished. So I think breaking it up is still a good idea. So yeah, been through a number of the cards. We're gonna we've been through white and blue, a couple of pretty good standouts. Arachne, Peter Parker, Norman Osborn, I think, are the biggest ones. Lady Octopus is an interesting build around. There might have been one or two more that I can't think off the dome. That were also kind of interesting. So yeah, we still have black, red, and green to get through, along with all the multicolored and all the colorless, as well as a couple of lands that are being added to the set. With that, that's going to do it for me. Thank you so much for watching. Probably going to boot up tomorrow, as long as nothing crazy happens, to try to finish this off. But if I don't, then I will see you whenever I see you.